Welcome back to Woman, Conversations in Black and White. I'm Bernadette.
And I'm Linda. We're sharing these conversations across racial lines about kind of touchy topics sometimes, and learning from each other, and then sharing our conversations by way of video and hopefully eventually podcasts that we can learn from, and maybe you can learn from, and encouraging you to do the same. Find somebody who doesn't look like you or doesn't live like you, doesn't believe like you, and see where you can find a friend and learn. So, yes. And today's topic,
we all know what it is because we always experience, there is always one person or people in our lives where you say something and they have something to say just like that, but to one more degree or more. And so Linda explained to me that there's actually a name for that, and it is called centering. And so we are going to talk about it today, and what it looks like in race, what it looks like in relationship, what it looks like in life. So Linda, you want to get us started?
Sure. So I think I came across the term centering in a couple different ways in the past couple weeks. And one was in a group about race relations and dealing with what's going on with racism between white people and Black people. And they use the term centering as in, we actually live in a white-centered culture, which is white people and white people systems are the norm, and everybody else is supposed to assimilate, fit in, be like them, etc. This is normal. This is centering. And that was like, oh, I hadn't heard that term before, but I understand what they're talking about. And I had already read a little bit in some of my books where that was the norm. Like, well, I think there was something about the Native American culture during the time of the residential schools where there was a phrase called "kill the Indian, save the man." And it was designed to erase the Native American culture without killing the child. They would take the child, they would shave his head, they would take away everything that was meaningful to him from a cultural standpoint and erase his culture. Well, that is an extreme example from probably 80 to 100 years ago of white centering. So that's one use of the term. If you could hold that for a minute. But then in conversation, like Bernadette started off talking, in conversation, centering is where you say, oh, I had a really hard time with my boss today. And your friend says, yeah, my boss said this to me today, and it just threw the whole day off for me. That person just dragged the conversation over to themselves. So it became centered on them. And there's multiple reasons for that, but I'll give you a moment to toss in anything you want to toss in, maybe from a counselor standpoint or from your own personal standpoint.
I was thinking when you were speaking about that, it reminds me of a statement that she's passed on now. The former Pulitzer Prize winning author, Toni Morrison, had made during an interview, and she is an African-American author. And she writes, Linda, if you have not read any of her books, she wrote Beloved and Sula and Song of Solomon and so many books. She writes with such a fluidity that I will remember parts of her book, but it is in such a way that I sometimes cannot discern if I read that or if I lived that. That's the fluidity with which she writes with. And so she was doing an interview, and a white interviewer asked her if she would ever write a book where a white person or white people were the main subjects of the books. And her answer was so divine. She goes, Black people can and have led full lives outside of the white gaze. And so the interviewer was taken aback because the response was, we don't need to have white people or their ideologies as the center of our lives to validate our existence or our reason for being here. So that to me has always been such a resounding response to white centering that white people don't even recognize. Like, there are whole sects of people, Hispanic people, Indian people, indigenous people that can have whole, full, true existences outside of what white people deem what life should be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's an excellent story to put in there. Thank you for bringing
Mm-hmm.
that in. I think I had read that, and that the white interviewer still didn't quite get what she was saying, if I remember right. Like, well, wouldn't you want to write about white people? And it's like, why would I want to? Except as I'm interacting with them, it's a whole way of life.
And she also said you would never ask Steinbeck or any other white author, why haven't you made Black people a main character in your books? You would never ask them that. And why is that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because the culture is white centered, and the woman asking it, or the interviewer asking it, was white centered too. So, all right. So now taking it out of the racial context, which is very important, but into more personal, just human conversations. It is, I don't have the facts here, so we'll all have to look this up together, but men typically believe that women talk a lot, and they talk more than men do. And that is a standard myth. But when you actually look at conversations where both men and women are in the room, it's always predominantly the men that are speaking. It just always is. And there's multiple reasons for that. But I won't go into all that now. The point is that there's a misperception. It's not an accurate perception of what's actually going on. So in personal conversation, if a person takes the conversation, and like the example about the boss, a woman says to a friend, my boss is really hard on me today and I had a hard day. And the other one says, oh yeah, my boss did this today and it went off in this direction. And there's no real presence. There's no real listening to the first woman's experience. The second woman just made it about her. And that's a different use of the word centering. We made it about us. I made it about me in this conversation. And a couple of days ago, I heard a podcast by Glennon Doyle and Abby Wambach and Amanda, I don't know Amanda's last name, trio. And they were talking, the podcast title is We Can Do Hard Things. And the particular episode was on conversation. But in that, she said, it's a fact that, and you could add this in from your counseling experience too, that when a person starts talking about themselves, there is a chemical hit, dopamine. That goes in, that is the same pleasure chemical that sex provides or that good food provides. And talking about oneself in a group provides the same dopamine hit to some degree that sex and food do.
It does. So it's an endorphin high.
It's an endorphin high.
Mm-hmm.
And then we wonder, why do they monopolize the conversation? Well, because they're getting a little high from it. You know, people are sitting around being polite and listening, and they're talking about themselves.
Yes.
And that is actually a very useful piece of information. You may be able to use that in your family settings too. But it's also something to watch for, that there are moments when it's appropriate to talk about oneself, and there's moments when it's profoundly heart-opening to be present to another person, whether they're feeling bad or sad or angry or just relating a story. To be present is a heart-opening experience that may not have quite the same dopamine hit, but it's a connective experience that we don't get if all we're doing is our own little dopamine high. Mm-hmm. What would you like to add to that?
Well, and also the heart experience that you just spoke of requires you to not be looking at you. And so in order to have those heart experiences and open ourselves up to each other, we have to not be so focused on us. And we also have to be willing to be vulnerable. Well, that's not as fun as me talking about me and everybody paying attention to me and everybody clapping and saying how great you are. That's amazing. I'm amazing. I should talk about me all the time. And so, that's essentially what ends up happening. And so those connections don't make. But oh my goodness, when you get outside of you and you make those connections, then your relationships become so much more fulfilling and so much more stronger. And you don't have the need to posture because you're getting those dopamine hits in different ways.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. You get them in more in-depth ways.
Yes.
And that's good.
Yeah.
And the heart connection that endures is richer than the little hit you get from talking about yourself. Because in truth, a lot of times, if you monopolize a conversation talking about yourself in a group, and you have a hunch that it wasn't quite appropriate, afterwards there's almost always this hangover of a little bit of shame or guilt, like I shouldn't have done it that way. And when you have a heart connection, there is more risk. You risk being seen, you risk being vulnerable, you risk the emotions that you may, like all of us, have spent a long time pushing away. I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel angry. I don't want to feel jealous. I don't want to feel any of these things that are actually running through me. And you run the risk of feeling real emotions when you open your heart and just be there with no comeback waiting to be spoken, and no preconceived, like, I'm going to say this as soon as she's done, or I'm even going to interrupt her. And there is more emotional risk, but there's so much more connection, more human connection. And, you know, I'm going to philosophize just a bit here. It's like, I don't know the answers to all the social problems, and I don't know the answers to systemic racism, but I do believe, and you and I've talked about this, that real relationships and heart connections to each other, to other people, and I'm a believer in plants too, to plants, to animals, that real heart connections are the antidote and the eventual resilient response to the systems that we've set in place that are not healthy, and that we can recognize are not healthy, but we feel kind of helpless. But heart connections is where that stuff starts.
And heart connections have to be intentional as well, Linda, because I think if you really look at our society right now, there's a great propensity as to where, what I call them, people are working on building fan clubs. And so that's, you get on social media and you'll say one thing and you'll get all these likes, this, that, and other. And so you'll have this false inflated sense of self that is very conditional on all external factors and validation from other people. And then when life actually happens, as it does for each and every one of us, you do not have any physical hands that you can reach out and hold to be able to make it through. Like, you and I are both on Facebook, and you and I will post a picture of this and we'll get tons and tons of likes. But I know, and excuse my language, if the shit hits the fan, I know I can walk 4 houses down the street and Linda will receive me with open arms. And if I need to lay on the floor and cry, she's going to lay on the floor and cry with me.
That's right.
You don't get that when all you're worried about is creating fan clubs. And so those heart-to-heart connections, we have to be purposeful in doing. And it fulfills so many parts of us. And it does impact our relationals and our race relations and how we look at society. But it's got to be here and not just, "Ooh, look at me, I'm fantastic."
Right.
That doesn't move the dial on anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Very, very well said. Very well said. So, you know, if you find yourself talking extensively about yourself or someone else's, and you can say, you know, I learned this thing today about centering. And if you're interested in the conversation the podcast I heard, it's Glennon Doyle and her partners called We Can Do Hard Things. And the particular one was conversation or conversational patterns, something like that. You can listen to more about it, but it was excellent. And it's certainly relevant culturally and personally and in friendships and everything. So try to not go for that little hit of dopamine, and see if you can actually go for the presence of listening to one another and a heart connection there. So thank you, Bernadette.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for always making it so relational. So, like, if you can't see it on a race level first, then look at it with your husband. You can probably find it there. Or your other significant other. It is easier to find it there first. She'll be like, oh, and then you can grow from there.
Right. Exactly. while black and white systemic racism is a big thing and a huge thing, the dynamics are not completely unfamiliar to me because I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. And I have experienced some of these things in the culture in relation to men. Mm-hmm. So it's like, there's a clue there. Uh-huh. So yeah, use whatever you know, not to make it about you, but to learn from and say, oh, I'm experiencing a little bit of what she experiences all the time in her family. So thank you.
Absolutely. We love bite-sized growth. We believe in bite-sized growth.
Right. Yes. Exactly. So.
Yes. So thank you so much for tuning in and viewing. We love having our conversations and even more being able to share them with you. And as we always say, start talking, keep talking, and we'll see you real soon.
See you next time. Bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.